I hope you have had a wonderful day. Got an exciting show for you tonight. I'm really excited about it. So if you can, do me a favor as you come on in, please say hello in the comment section. I want a lot of engagement, a lot of activity, a lot of those thumbs ups, those hearts, all that good stuff. And if you would, do me a favor and share the show. Hello, Jack Rabbit. Hello, Jacqueline. Hello. No, Miss No. hello. I can't even say. Welcome. Glad that you are here. Share for me if you would. We're going to get right into this thing, this show tonight, because I'm really excited to share with you what I have for you. Hey, Willa, thank you for joining. Thank you. So we're going to talk about a couple of things tonight. We're talking about, of course, the book that we're studying is When Affirmative Action Was White. That's the book that we're studying. We're also going to talk about no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, only permanent interests. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And if we have time, we're going to talk about bread and circus. What in the world is bread and circus? So we're looking at chapter 2. We talked about continue. So last week's show, we talked about a little bit about the conditions in Alabama at the time, which were kind of indicative of what we saw in the South. And so we talked a little bit about that. Now I want to really talk about how whites used the government to really structure affirmative action for whites during this time. We're talking about 30s and 40s. And of course, racism has cast a long shadow. So we're still feeling some of the effects of that today. We're talking about a crude disadvantage. So during the New Deal, 1934, under Roosevelt at the time, that's when we saw a lot of these social programs, because we're coming out of but we're trying to transition out of the Great Depression. So a lot of these programs were structured to kind of help people. They were more so, I guess you can call them socialistic in nature, because it was the government doing a lot of the things that at this time the private sector was not able to or willing to do for the regular people, because there's a lot of unemployment, a lot of homelessness, a lot of different things are going on. Now, they did this, the Southern whites, the whites did this by making most of the committees that went along in the government at that time, they had their number in the committee. So in other words, a lot of the Democrats in this point, we're talking about Southern Democrats, and so they had a lot of their people in select committees, because that's really how you controlled, or at least guided the legislation. You can put exactly what you want in it. And so we really have to think about, in the South at this time, we're not really talking so much Republican or Democrat. We're really talking about racism. So whether you're Republican, Democrat, if you're from the South, they call these Dixiecrats, And so they had a huge say in the government at this time. So one of the ways that they controlled it was making sure that their particular members got on the right committees. Now, also, they really knew a lot about the legislative rules and procedures. It's not just going in there and just throwing up rules and throwing up laws and you just pass through. There's a layer upon layer upon layer of rules, and we have to do this, we have to do this the other way. Well, they really knew all the little details and all the little fineries of exactly how to structure things. And so they made that a cornerstone of what they were doing as they're structuring these government programs specifically for whites. Now, they also exploited the gap between the intensity of their feelings and the relative indifference of the other members of Congress. So this group, this minority group, but when I say minority, I'm not talking about a black minority or people of color minority. I'm just talking about they were a small group, but they were very dedicated. They were very focused. They were very passionate about keeping the South, these Dixiecrats, keeping the South the way it was. They didn't want the government coming in and changing their way of life, which was very structured in racism, which was very structured in prejudice. And so they wanted to keep it that way, but at the same time, they wanted to help their constituents which were poor whites. So they really had that focus, and we want to help our people, poor whites, middle class whites, wealthy whites, but we want to make sure that we structure this. Now, one of the things I want to tell you is, even today, if you want to understand policies and take out the emotion, just take the R and the D out from the person's name or the policy. Don't worry about whether it's Republican or Democrat, but focus on, does it help the majority of the Black community? So that's how I want you to be thinking. When you're thinking about policies, you're looking at policies today, you're saying, wow, does this help the Black community or not? I need to take out this R or this D, not look at that emotional tie that it may have to it, and say, long term, will this help the majority of the Black community? And I think if you do that, you're going to be able to discern particular policies. And I'm going to talk about a few of them in just a moment, and you'll be able to see, is this good for the Black community or not? Now, they also use 3 mechanisms to keep their racist control of the country while helping other whites. So there's 3 different mechanisms that they use. So one is, whenever the nature of the legislation permitted, they sought to leave out as many Blacks as possible without using racial language. So we've talked about before, when we were looking at the color of law, how some language was put in, don't sell the Negroes. You can't do that. So that was a covenant, that was a restrictive covenant. But we're not talking about this, we're talking about federal law. So they didn't use racial language in the law itself. So how would they be able to do that? Well, what they did is they chose categories of work in which Blacks were heavily overrepresented, notably farm workers and maids. So when they instituted the law, say for instance, creation of unions, setting the minimum wage, hours worked, Social Security, Blacks weren't even able to, engage in Social Security until the 50s. And so they excluded these positions from federal protection. Farm workers, maids, those type of positions were excluded. So you didn't really have to say, well, we're going to keep Blacks out. And also now realize that there were some poor whites, or there were some whites, I don't know if they're poor or not, there were some whites that also did these jobs as well. They just happened to get caught up in it. Oh, well, too bad, so sad. But they knew that the majority of people that would be excluded would be Black. And so that's the way you can wrap a law around and not actually have to say, okay, it's going to impact Black people, or no, we need to exclude Black people. Now, let me give you an example of what we see today that kind of echoes that same sentiment. One of them is Elizabeth Warren has talked about a student forgiveness program. Well, if you understand and you know the numbers, and we do the data here, only 20% of African Americans, Blacks, have a degree. So actually, who would be helped most by a student loan forgiveness program? There'd be some Blacks. Thank God I'd be one of them. But if I'm looking at it from a community perspective, 80% of the Black community would not be impacted at all. And so that would not be a program of uplift for the Black community. It would help. In fact, the segment that would be helped most by that would be middle class and wealthy whites, because a lot of poor whites, they didn't go to college at all. But a lot of middle class and upper middle class whites had to get on loans. They had to take out loans against their home to do this, or they're thinking about doing that. And so they would actually be the ones that would be benefited by that. Another one of the laws, opportunity, it's not a loss, really, it's opportunity, is opportunity zones. Now, opportunity zones, what these are distressed areas in certain cities where you can invest capital gains into redeveloping that area. Now, on the surface, that sounds wonderful. That sounds great. Wow, who wouldn't want that? But understand that since most African Americans are not invested in the stock market or real estate or have capital gains, this would not impact them for the majority of the opportunity zones. This is going to be white capital. In fact, wealthy white capital, because you can leave the money in there to be deferred tax-free. So opportunity zones were on the surface of it, how they're being sold is to redevelop poor areas. What you see is that really this is more of a benefit for whites, even though there's no racial language in it and anybody can participate in it. But you see who's really benefited is capital. And we just saw today as Trump requested more funding for farmers. Now, there's no racial language there. It just seems kind of obvious, just kind of on the surface, like, wow, that's really good. That should be for everybody. And it is for everybody. But also understand that the majority of farmers are white. So we could call this affirmative action for whites because the majority of farmers are white. And so this really wouldn't benefit or help the Black community at all. And so you see, even today, how if you're not really understanding how the process works, that this could be seen as affirmative action for whites, but without the name Black, Negro, white being placed in the law. This is happening today, folks. It's still happening. So actually, that was an example of just one way. That was an example of just one way. Now, they also, during this time of the New Deal, this was talking about the New Deal, a lot of government programs. So these weren't private programs. This was the government reaching down to poor people and helping them out. Unfortunately, 1934, at this time, we're talking about poor whites, and the majority of blacks were, the vast majority of blacks were left out of this opportunity. And you have to also remember, during this period of time, the population in our country was majority Black and white. There were a few other, minorities, but the vast majority was Black and white. The great, immigration push really didn't happen to the 60s. So from, up until now, we're talking about Black and white community. So the second way they did this, they insisted that these programs, these New Deal programs for the poor and veterans, be placed in local hands to administer. So think about this. So this is a government program, but how can you control the funds and who gets it and who doesn't get it? Well, you put it in local government hands. So you have the racist local government controlling access to these funds, controlling who gets it and who doesn't get it. And that's a big problem. That was a very big problem, because obviously you're putting the fox in charge of the hen house, and that just never works well for the hens. Great for the fox, doesn't work so well for the hens. And so that was the second way they did it. The third way that they did it is they prevented Congress from attaching any sort of anti-discrimination provisions to a wide array of the social welfare programs, such as community health programs, school lunches, and hospital construction grants. Well, what does that mean? If you have provisions in there that say, hey, so many, and you can call them quotas if you like, or oversight, so many of these need to go to blacks, or we're going to check and make sure this is done fairly. When you don't have those controls in a government program, then it goes back to C number 2. You have local people who have all the control, and they can do all that they want to with that program and with the finances. If you happen to be one of the people that on the outside looking in, then you don't have a say, and you really don't have anybody you can turn to. Even if you do have a complaint, they're not trying to hear it. They don't want to hear that. So what we see is at the very moment when this wide array of public policies were providing most white Americans with valuable tools to advance from social welfare to ensure retirement for their old age through Social Security, getting good jobs, accruing economic security and stability, and building assets. All this led to this growing middle white class. And as we see, most blacks were left behind or left out. And that is affirmative action for whites. So that's what I wanted to cover for that part. I hope that you like that. I hope that it kind of gives you a sense of how much the government played a part. This was not bootstraps. This was not hard work. This was not, anything like that. This was a government, our government, not a government, our government, deciding winners and losers, deciding who's going to be wealthy and who's not. So if that helped you out, make sure you get into the comment section. Thumbs up, heart, still not too late to share the show. Give me one moment here. I want to pull up a few other things with you, at least one other thing with you as time is getting low, is that as a black community, the ADOS community, we have to start making sure that we understand that we don't have any permanent enemies or permanent friends. We have permanent interests. That's where we have to focus on. So it's not about being a Democrat or Republican. It's who has our best interests and who can give us the best deal. And so give me one moment. I did want to share something with you. Okay. I want to read this to you. And I'll put this link in the comments after the show. And hopefully you'll get an insight to what I'm talking about. The world has no permanent friends or enemies, only interests. All right. This is says the minority regime in Ethiopia believed its relationship with the West was for eternity. Unfortunately, the minority regime, the West believes friendship is predicated on how much of its own interests are protected. Let me say that again, because I really want you to get this. Unfortunately, for the minority regime, the West believes friendship is predicated on how much of its own interests are protected. How much better would the black community be if we thought that way? So, in other words, it will come down to, what have you done for me lately? Not in 1960, not the Civil Rights Act, not the last black president. What have you done for me lately? The former Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, once said, America has no permanent friends or enemies, only interests. Kissinger wasn't the first to make such a statement. The two-time British Prime Minister, Lord Palmerston, was also quoted to have said, Britain has no eternal allies and no perpetual enemies, only interests that were eternal and perpetual. One can only interpret the statement as follows: our friends must serve our interests, therefore they will remain our friends. At the same time, we have no problem sleeping with our enemies as long as it serves our interests. Our past friends may become our enemies, as today's enemies potentially become our future friends. And so what I'm trying to say, what I'm saying to you, is we have to move beyond the emotional attachment. We have to move beyond my mother voted this or my father did that. We have to look at every candidate, every party as a business transaction, as in, what can you do for me? What have you done for me lately? And if we do that as a community and we stand firm, I absolutely believe we're going to see things change in our community. If we don't, if we keep going back to doing things the way we've always done them, well, you know what the definition of insanity is: doing things the way you've always done them, done them, but expecting a different result. All right, fam. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed this. If this has been some help to you, some benefit to you, please like, thumbs up, hearts, comments, all that good stuff. Still share the video for me, if you will. Also, we're about to come up on just a little bit for Yvette, so I'm looking forward to it. Hey, Monday has really become my favorite night of the week. It really has. Do me a favor also. Go to ShawneeHill.com. That's my YouTube page. Go there and subscribe. I'm going to be having new videos. This video will actually be there as well. But I'm going to have new videos coming up this week about ADOS, some training, some really, really good things over there. And also, if you want to become part of the reparations movement, I will put this in the comments as well. Come over to www.adocsfamily.com. Join our family, our group, our book club, and we'd love to have you. All right, guys, it's almost that time. I got done before 8:30, so that's pretty cool. That's pretty good. And I will see you over at Yvette Carnell, in a little bit. Love you, fam. Remember, sign that petition for reparations. All right. Thank you for coming in, and have a wonderful evening. Goodbye.